A soldier hears the drone before he sees it. That sound matters. It is thin, electrical, almost insulting. It does not have the majesty of a bomber engine or the menace of a ballistic missile. It sounds like a yard tool that learned bad habits. Yet the men under it react as if a major weapon has entered the sky, because it has. A small drone appears above a road. It is cheap enough to be lost. It is good enough to find a fuel truck. That one fact changes the local battle. The truck stops. The driver hides. The convoy disperses. Radios begin to move traffic that someone will later call situational awareness, because every age gives fear a professional name. The drone may carry a warhead. It may carry only a camera. Either way, it has already created work. The defender must jam it, shoot it, decoy it, hide from it, or accept the risk that something more violent is now looking through its eyes. That is the drone revolution. It is not the machine by itself. It is the exchange rate. A drone that costs less than a used pickup can threaten a radar, an ammunition vehicle, or a command post. A defender may answer with a missile worth more than a house, an electronic warfare team that took months to train, or a hasty evacuation that delays the whole operation. The attacker spends small money to create expensive decisions. That is the part that has broken the old grammar of air power. For most of the jet age, air power was aristocratic. Aircraft were costly. Pilots were scarce. Maintenance was ritualized. Bases were enormous. Even a small air force required money, training, industry, and time. Cheap drones have not abolished that world. Fighter aircraft still matter. Long-range bombers still matter. Air defense still matters. But beneath that exquisite layer, a rougher form of air power has appeared. It is disposable. It is numerous. It is hard to count. It does not ask permission from the old priesthood of acquisition offices and platform managers. A drone can be built like a munition, flown like a sensor, lost like a bullet, and replaced like a phone accessory. The machine is crude in some cases. The effect is not crude at all. Today's episode is about that shift. The disposable Air Force is not a metaphor. It is a new force design problem, and the countries that treat it as a novelty will discover, rather rudely, that the novelty has teeth. Start with the most important point. Drones did not become decisive because they became perfect. They became decisive because they became tolerable to lose. That sounds modest. It is not. A military that can tolerate losses behaves differently from a military that cannot. If every aircraft is a national asset, commanders become cautious. If every aircraft requires a highly trained pilot, leaders protect the pilot as much as the platform. If every aircraft has a long supply chain and a major maintenance footprint, then every sortie carries the shadow of replacement. Cheap drones bend that calculus. A commander can send a small drone over a tree line, down a road, across a river, or toward a suspected antenna site with a very different emotional budget. If the drone is lost, the unit loses money and time. It does not lose a pilot. It does not trigger a national mourning cycle. It does not require a rescue mission that risks more people to recover the first one. That is the first quiet revolution. The drone lowers the psychological threshold for reconnaissance and attack. A commander who would never risk a helicopter to confirm a target may risk 10 drones. The difference is not bravery, it is accounting. Once that happens, air power begins to leak downward. It leaves the rarefied domain of air forces and enters the hands of ground units. Infantry, who once depended on higher headquarters for aerial observation, now have their own eyes in the sky. A small unit can watch a road. It can observe an enemy trench. It can correct fire. It can test whether a suspected position is occupied. That does not make the infantryman a pilot in the old sense. It makes him part of an airborne sensor network, which is a colder and more serious thing. The old battlefield had hiding places. Some were physical, some were bureaucratic. A truck could sit behind a building. A command post could move into a basement. A logistics node could operate behind the apparent safety of distance. Drones compress that comfort. They turn local terrain into exposed terrain. The result is not omniscience. Drones miss things. Weather matters. Jamming matters. Operators get tired. Batteries die. Cheap cameras lie in their own way. Yet the aggregate effect is relentless. If a force can launch enough drones often enough, it creates a habit of being watched. A watched army moves differently. It disperses more. It uses decoys more. It hides heat signatures. It changes timing. It turns simple movement into a choreography of avoidance. Even when the drone does not kill, it taxes the whole force. That is why the disposable Air Force cannot be judged only by confirmed vehicle losses. Some of its real effect lives in delay, friction, exhaustion, and the steady corrosion of confidence. A cheap drone makes every open road feel like a confession booth with propellers. Now put the economics under a microscope. The central question in modern drone warfare is not whether a drone can destroy a tank. Sometimes it can, sometimes it cannot. Armor is complicated, and videos online turn war into theater faster than a clerk turns coffee into paperwork. The better question is this: can a cheap drone force an expensive military system to behave differently? The answer is yes. A drone does not need to kill the most expensive object on the field to create an expensive result. If it finds a fuel truck, the armored formation slows. If it finds an artillery position, the battery must displace. If it finds a bridge repair crew, the crossing becomes dangerous. If it finds a radar, the air defense network must decide whether to radiate, move, hide, or fire. Every option costs something. This is why the term cost exchange matters. War has always had a financial logic, but drone warfare makes that logic painfully visible. One side launches a cheap system. The other side must choose from a menu of costly responses. Fire a missile, and the defender may spend far more than the incoming drone costs. Use electronic warfare, and the defender reveals a capability, consumes power, and attracts attention. Do nothing, and the drone may find something worth far more than itself. No choice is free. Russia's use of Shahed-type drones against Ukraine shows the logic at scale. CSIS analysis has estimated that these drone strikes can be cost-effective compared with more expensive missile attacks, especially when the goal is to pressure infrastructure and air defense over time. Ukraine's answer has been revealing. Rather than relying only on expensive interceptors, it has pushed low-cost drone interceptors into production. AP reported that some Ukrainian interceptor drones cost as little as $1,000, a striking reversal of the old pattern, where multi-million-dollar interceptors were used against far cheaper threats. That is the shape of the future. Cheap offense forces cheap defense. Expensive defense becomes the backstop, not the default. This will be uncomfortable for militaries built around exquisite platforms. An exquisite platform concentrates capability. It may carry advanced sensors, communications, weapons, and software in one expensive package. That design makes sense when the platform can survive and when there are enough of them. Cheap drones attack both assumptions. They do not need to defeat the exquisite platform directly. They can force it to hide. They can attack its support system. They can saturate the defenses around it. They can create so many small problems that the expensive system spends its day swatting flies while the barn catches fire. The problem is not merely that cheap systems beat expensive systems. That is too simple, and too pleasing to the internet's inner peasant revolt. Expensive systems still do things cheap drones cannot do. The problem is that cheap systems can impose the wrong tasks on expensive systems. A fighter aircraft is magnificent. Using it as an answer to every low-cost airborne nuisance is like sending a Duke to unclog a sink. The Duke may succeed, but the household is already in trouble. The second part of this story is production. A disposable Air Force must be produced at disposable scale. That is where many Western militaries become uneasy, because their procurement systems were not built to buy aircraft the way armies buy ammunition. They were built to buy programs. A program has milestones, reviews, requirements, prime contractors, sustainment concepts, and documentation thick enough to stop small arms fire if bound properly. That structure can produce extraordinary systems. It can also produce slowness with a badge. Cheap drones punish slowness because the battlefield changes faster than the acquisition cycle. In Ukraine, both sides have adapted drones through constant iteration. Frequencies change, antennas change, guidance methods change, warhead configurations change. Countermeasures appear, then work for a while, then lose advantage as the other side adjusts. The Australian Army Research Centre has made a useful point here. Drone capability matters only when it becomes part of organization, command, logistics, and fire planning. In plain English, a pile of drones is not a force. It becomes a force when the unit knows how to task them, replace them, repair them, defend them, and feed their information into weapons. That is harder than it sounds. A military cannot simply buy a warehouse full of quadcopters and declare itself modern. That is cosplay with batteries. The drone must have operators. The operators need training. The training must survive rotation. The unit needs spare parts. The batteries need charging. The video feed needs protection. The data must reach someone who can act on it. The commander must understand what the drone can see and what it cannot. Then comes the most difficult part, replacement. Attritable systems only make sense if the force can replace them fast enough. A drone that is cheap but unavailable is a paper airplane in a procurement briefing. Mass requires production lines, modular components, stockpiled parts, simplified contracting, and repair loops near the front. It also requires permission to accept imperfection. That last phrase may be the hinge of the whole problem. Western defense culture often wants systems that are tested, hardened, certified, and integrated before they arrive in the hands of operators. That instinct has reasons behind it. Bad systems kill friendly forces. Unsecured systems leak data. Poorly tested systems fail under stress. Yet disposable drones live in a harsher tempo. A system that is 80% ready now may be more useful than a perfect system that arrives after the enemy has changed the geometry of the fight. The Pentagon's replicator effort was an attempt to grapple with this problem by fielding large numbers of attritable autonomous systems on a short timeline. National Defense reported that Replicator's first iteration focused on delivering many thousands of all-domain attritable systems, with a later counter-UAS focus. The institutional signal matters even where execution remains contested. The United States understands the problem. The hard question is whether it can buy and field cheap mass without forcing cheap mass to dress up like an expensive program. That is where bureaucracies become comic in the old tragic sense. A cheap drone enters the building. By the time it leaves, it has a compliance hat, a life cycle sustainment plan, and 3 meetings about whether it counts as aircraft. Somewhere in the distance, an enemy workshop solders another batch together and sends them forward. The Disposable Air Force is as much a cultural test as a military one. Can a wealthy military accept a weapon that is not prestigious? Can a professional officer corps take seriously a system that looks improvised? Can acquisition officials tolerate short service lives? Can commanders plan around massive equipment loss without treating loss as failure? The word attritable does a great deal of polite work here. It means the system is expected to be lost. That expectation changes everything. Maintenance changes, training changes, inventory changes, operational art changes. A unit may launch many drones knowing that a percentage will fail, be jammed, crash, or be shot down. The mission plan assumes waste. For militaries raised on exquisite platforms, waste feels like sin. For industrial warfare, waste can be a method. That is not an argument for carelessness. It is an argument for understanding scale. A cheap drone force wins by creating more problems than the defender can solve at the right price. If the defender can shoot down every drone cheaply, the attacker has a problem. If the defender must spend heavily each time, the attacker has discovered a tax system with wings. This is why the drone war is also a manufacturing war. The state that can make drones quickly, adapt them quickly, and distribute them quickly gains a tempo advantage. The state that can make counter-drone systems at the same rhythm gains resilience. The winner is not necessarily the side with the most beautiful machine. The winner may be the side with the fastest loop between battlefield failure and factory correction. A drone gets jammed, the frequency changes. A drone gets shot down, the route changes. A warhead underperforms, the mounting changes. A camera fails in fog, the sensor package changes. That loop has to be short, or the drone force becomes a museum of last month's assumptions. In older procurement culture, a requirement could sit like a stone tablet. In drone warfare, requirements behave more like weather reports. They are useful because they change. The third part is defense. Every offensive drone creates a defensive market. That market is already crowded. There are guns, missiles, jammers, spoofers, radars, acoustic detectors, optical trackers, high-power microwave systems, lasers, interceptor drones, and nets. The variety is impressive. It also reveals the problem. No single answer is enough. Electronic warfare can disrupt drones, but it does not erase them from war. Jamming creates temporary windows. It can protect a position. It can break a control link. It can force drones into less effective flight profiles. Yet the enemy adapts. Guidance can shift. Frequencies can move. Autonomy can reduce dependence on live control. Fiber optic drones can avoid radio jamming in certain tactical settings. The defense must keep moving because the offense keeps mutating. Kinetic defense has its own trouble. Shooting drones down works, but the price must fit the target. A multi-million-dollar missile may be justified if the incoming drone threatens a power plant, a headquarters, or an air defense battery. It is ruinous as a routine answer to cheap mass. That is why Ukraine's move toward low-cost interceptor drones matters. It points toward a defensive principle that every serious military now has to absorb. The answer to cheap airborne mass must include cheap airborne defense. This is not glamorous. It is necessary. Interceptor drones are a sign that air defense is being pulled downward, the same way aerial reconnaissance was pulled downward. The old air defense model centered on specialized systems protecting large areas or high-value assets. That model still matters. Yet the drone age demands more layers closer to the unit. A platoon, convoy, radar site, logistics yard, or airbase may need its own practical counter-drone capability. That means sensors must become more common. Operators must be trained to recognize drone signatures. Units must know when to jam, when to shoot, when to hide, and when to let a decoy absorb attention. Passive defense returns with modern urgency. Camouflage matters. Dispersion matters. Emission control matters. Dummy vehicles matter. The battlefield becomes a contest of signatures. A drone is looking for contrast, heat contrast, movement contrast, radio contrast, visual contrast, pattern contrast. The defender's job is to become boring to the machine. That may be the least heroic sentence in military affairs, but it may save more vehicles than a speech about courage. The strange result is that drone warfare pushes armies both forward and backward at once. Forward, because the battlefield is filled with sensors, software, autonomy, and rapid manufacturing. Backward, because troops rediscover concealment, decoys, trenches, overhead cover, and the ancient wisdom of not standing where the enemy can see you. The future has arrived, and it brought sandbags. There is a lesson there for anyone with a polished briefing deck and a fragile ego. Now widen the lens. The Disposable Air Force changes deterrence because it changes what states can threaten. A country with a modest defense budget may struggle to build a traditional air force. It may still build or acquire drones capable of threatening ports, airfields, energy infrastructure, ships near shore, and military logistics. That does not make it equal to a major power. It does give it options. Options matter in crisis. A weaker state may not need to defeat a stronger military outright. It may need to raise the cost of entry. Cheap drones are useful for that purpose because they can create distributed risk. They can force the stronger power to protect more places at once. They can stretch air defense. They can complicate staging. They can make rear areas feel less rear. This is one reason counter-drone defense around bases has become so important. A modern airbase is a dense concentration of expensive aircraft, fuel, munitions, maintenance crews, command systems, and communications. It is a miracle of organized vulnerability. Cheap drones do not need to destroy the base to matter. They can interrupt sortie generation, damage exposed equipment, force dispersal, and create political pressure if images of burning aircraft spread online. The strategic effect may come from the image as much as the explosion. That is another uncomfortable feature of drone warfare. It is native to the camera age. Many drones record their own attacks. The munition becomes its own media team. A strike on a vehicle becomes footage. Footage becomes morale, propaganda, fundraising, recruitment, and pressure on foreign supporters. War has always had spectacle. Drones compress the distance between battlefield action and public consumption. For defense leaders, this means drone warfare is also narrative warfare. A cheap system can create a viral image of an expensive loss. That image may distort the broader military balance, but distortion itself has effect. Political leaders react to visible losses. Publics react to repeated images. Allies react to perceived momentum. The drone is a weapon, a sensor, and a little courier of humiliation. This is where serious analysis has to resist both exaggeration and denial. Drones have not made tanks obsolete. They have made careless armor operations expensive. Drones have not made artillery obsolete. They have made artillery easier to find if it fires badly and moves slowly. Drones have not made air forces obsolete. They have forced air forces to defend their bases, rethink mass, and accept that air power now exists below the level of crewed aircraft. The old systems remain. The cheap systems change the conditions under which the old systems operate. That is the sober view. It is less viral than declaring everything dead, but it has the advantage of being true. So what does this mean for defense? For uniformed leaders, the first lesson is that drone warfare must be part of the force, not an accessory hanging from the side of the force. A unit that treats drones as toys for clever specialists will learn slowly. A unit that builds drones into planning, reconnaissance, fires, logistics, and defense will learn faster. The difference will show up when the first systems fail, because failure is guaranteed. Training must include loss. Operators need to practice under jamming, degraded video, bad weather, battery shortages, and ambiguous targets. Commanders need to learn how to use drone feeds without becoming hypnotized by them. A live video feed has a strange authority. It feels like truth because it is immediate. It can still mislead. The camera sees a slice, not the war. For acquisition leaders, the lesson is harsher. The procurement system needs a lane for systems that are cheap, short-lived, and revised constantly. That lane cannot behave like a boutique aircraft program. It has to behave closer to munitions procurement mixed with software release management. The military needs a way to buy many, test quickly, update often, and discard what fails without turning every failure into a congressional thunderstorm. For the defense industrial base, the opportunity is real, but it comes with a warning. Companies that understand field repair, modular design, secure control links, low-cost sensors, and rapid production will matter. Companies that try to turn every drone into a jewel-encrusted flying invoice may still win contracts, because this is Earth and not heaven. Yet the battlefield will judge them with less courtesy. For commercial aerospace and space companies, there is a parallel lesson. Drones depend on communications, navigation, imagery, mapping, weather data, and software. Space-based services sit quietly behind much of that ecosystem. A drone force that relies on satellite connectivity or positioning inherits space vulnerabilities. Jamming, spoofing, cyber intrusion, and ground segment disruption can degrade the whole chain. The drone may be cheap, but the network behind it may be expensive and fragile. That is where orbital estimate listeners should pay attention. The future drone fight will not remain neatly inside the air domain. It will touch spectrum management, satellite navigation, commercial imagery, cloud processing, battlefield apps, and cyber defense. A drone strike may begin with a satellite image, route through a tablet, use a commercial component, and end as a video clip processed for public release. The kill chain and the media chain may overlap more than strategists would like to admit. Policy audiences face a different problem. Cheap drones spread. They spread because the components are commercial, the designs are copied, and the tactical lessons are visible. Export controls can slow some flows. They cannot make the knowledge disappear. A world of cheap drones means more actors can threaten infrastructure. It also means domestic security agencies will need to think about airports, prisons, power sites, ports, and political events in a new way. That is the unpleasant majesty of cheap air power. Once air power becomes affordable, it stops behaving like a privilege. The forecast is straightforward. The next major military advantage will go to the force that can combine cheap mass with disciplined command. Cheap drones alone will create noise. Discipline alone will preserve old habits too long. The dangerous force is the one that can produce disposable systems at scale, connect them to fires, protect them from disruption, and replace them without drama. Watch the counter-drone layer. That is the indicator that matters. When a military fields cheap interceptors, trains local units to use them, and links them to sensors without demanding perfection, it has begun to absorb the lesson. When it keeps relying on expensive interceptors for cheap threats, it is still paying luxury prices for a street fight. Watch the production loop. If drone variants change monthly, the force is learning. If the same model sits in inventory while the enemy adapts, the force is collecting artifacts. Watch the command culture. If junior units can request, launch, lose, and replace drones without bureaucratic theater, the military is adjusting. If every drone sortie feels like paperwork wearing a flight suit, the old system is still in charge. The Disposable Air Force does not end the age of advanced aircraft. It does something more unsettling. It builds a lower layer of air power beneath them, a layer that is cheap enough to swarm, cheap enough to lose, and cheap enough to make expensive systems spend their lives reacting. That is the broken economics of modern war. The sky used to belong to those who could afford it. Now parts of it can be rented by the hour, assembled in a workshop, launched from a field, and flown toward a target that costs 1,000 times more than the machine sent to find it. That should amaze us. It should also inspire a little dread, because the future of air power may not arrive with a thunderclap. It may arrive as a thin electric whine over a road, followed by a radio call, followed by the sudden realization that the cheap machine has made everyone expensive. This has been Orbital Estimate. I'm your host. Stay alert to the systems beneath the spectacle. In modern war, the decisive machine is often the one nobody respected until it changed the price of everything.